A very warm welcome to you from Equa Marketing. This presentation is brought to you by Equa.com, a leader in digital marketing. Hello everyone, and welcome to an amazing episode of the Growing Vet podcast show.
Today I have Dr. Jim Dahle with me. He's the founder of WhiteCoatInvestor.com, and he's also an emergency doctor. Hello, doctor. Welcome. I'm so glad to have you today. Thank you. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself so our audience gets to know you, and also kind of how you got into this idea of helping other doctors like yourself learn more about money and how to make the most of money?
Sure. I grew up in Alaska. I went away to Utah for my undergraduate and medical school work. While I was there, I really didn't have any great interest in business or personal finance or investing. It wasn't until I went away to my emergency medicine residency in Arizona that I really started developing an interest in it. And the reason why is because at that point in my life, I felt like I'd been ripped off by just about every type of financial professional there was. Insurance agents, financial advisors, realtors, appraisers, even a recruiter. And I just got sick of it. I got sick of feeling like I was being taken advantage of. And so I started reading and learning on my own. Websites, blogs, forums. I live next to a used bookstore and just started picking up financial books and reading them. You know, they're not the most interesting reading sometimes, but I was learning and realized that, while a lot of the books were terrible, several of them were very good and very helpful. And after a while, I not only realized this stuff wasn't that hard to learn, but that nobody was teaching it to doctors. Nobody was getting it in medical school or residency. And so I found myself doing a lot more teaching than I was learning after a while. And honestly, I got sick of typing the same thing over and over again into internet forums. And so I started the website so that I could just post a link to it. And that was started in May 2011. And since then, the site has grown into the most widely read, physician-specific personal finance and investing website in the world. We've expanded the what we call the empire since then. Now I have a podcast, and there's a book, and there's a YouTube channel, and Facebook page, and Twitter feed, and every way that we can try to get this message into the hands of more doctors. But mostly the point of it is to help doctors get a fair shake on Wall Street, so they're not getting ripped off over and over again like I was throughout their career.
I can totally relate to that. I mean, I haven't used a personal, financial planner or whatever for a long time because I felt they're making money off of your money, and why should they? We work hard for our money. Why should we just give it to somebody else to make money off of you and not take any risk? I mean, if you win, they win, but if you lose, you lose. That kind of doesn't.
No, that's exactly right. You're taking all the risk, and it's as one of my financial advisor friends likes to say, asset under management fees are the best passive income there is, because
right.
It's continually going up and you're doing the same amount of work going forward. And so it's not that every doctor shouldn't use a financial advisor or that there aren't any good financial advisors out there, but simply that a little bit of financial literacy goes a very long way when you combine it with a physician income.
Absolutely. Let's go back to the basics, right? Of course, eventually, all of us, especially the doctors who spend so much time going to medical school and piling up this huge student debt, and then, again, piling up more debt to buy a practice or get into a practice and then work really, really hard. We all want the same thing, which is, we want to have a good life for our family. We want to have, the time to enjoy that life. And we want to, take care of our kids and perhaps our retirement, and we want to be safe. So we are not asking, especially doctors are not asking for much. They're asking for pretty much, the basics.
That's exactly right. The phrase I use in my book, also titled the same as the website, is the good life. And that's what doctors want. They want the good life. It's basically the ability to practice the way they want to, take care of their family, pay off their debts, and maybe have a few luxuries along the way. Very few of us went into medicine hoping to get rich or wealthy. That wasn't really our motivation. And for most of us, it really still isn't. But at the same time, we're working very hard, and we expect to, at least be paid fairly for the work we're doing. And so I think part of that is taking care of the money that you are paid such that it grows as it should, and can eventually provide you a comfortable retirement.
Absolutely, and I think that's an excellent point. Like I personally know a lot of doctors. They work super hard and they don't really have much to show for. I mean, they are in minus half a million, minus $1 million, and they're already like in their mid 40s, and I mean they're not even above the water, so to speak. They're underwater. So
that's exactly right. Most doctors start their careers with a negative net worth, and it might only be minus 200,000, but these days it might also be minus 500 or 600,000.
Right. So step one is to get out of that underwater situation and hopefully start bringing your head up, and then hopefully be in a situation where even if you do have debt, it's like an investment debt as opposed to an expense debt. What I mean is, it's you have income to pay for that debt, not really you working to pay for that debt.
That's right.
So
definitely the first thing you do is you try to get your net worth back to broke. I mean, most docs are much worse than worthless.
Right.
The bum on the corner living under the bridge, he's got a net worth of zero, whereas the doctor's got a net worth of minus $300,000. He's much worse than broke.
Right. Exactly, and he works like crazy. The network, the guy on the bum doesn't do anything, and he's still in a better situation than the doctor who spent so many years and even now continues to work, crazy hours and takes on crazy, risks, in the profession with all the liability and stuff like that, and then, even the team that they have to support. And like I knew of a doctor. He had 30 people, and when we did all the math, he was making $15 an hour, and he's one of the top doctors. I mean, if you really did the math, right after you pay the banker and pay everybody else, he was working 60, 70 hours, and he might have not gone to medical school. I mean, you know what I mean?
That's right. Part of the problem is the disconnect we get from ourselves and our family and our friends and society that we're rich doctors by virtue of our income. But the truth is that many of us are not rich, because rich is really a net worth, not an income. And so if you're still worse than broke, you can't be living like you're a millionaire, because you simply aren't. And if you keep living like that, you're never going to be.
Absolutely. Can we talk about the fundamentals of money and how to think about money? Because I think maybe that's where the problem starts.
Well, I think the one I briefly just mentioned is an important one, to realize the difference between income and net worth. A doctor who's making $400,000 a year and spending $400,000 a year is really in no different of a financial situation than somebody making $50,000 a year and spending $50,000 a year. Essentially, they're both broke and living hand to mouth. And there are a lot of doctors out there living hand to mouth. It's unbelievable to see it sometimes, that they're, waiting for their next paycheck to hit because they've got checks they've got to write out. And really, like I tell the medical students that I have over to my house about once a year for kind of a dinner with the doc, I tell them, if you can't live on $200,000 a year, you've got a spending problem, not an earning problem. And so I think that's the first key principle, to realize what wealth is. And it's, with a high income, a doctor is 90% of the way there. I think of it about like that Super Bowl a few years ago, where they were on the 2-yard line and all they had to do was run the ball into the end zone. Instead, they came up with a complicated passing play and ended up throwing an interception and lost the game. That's what doctors tend to do. They're already on the 2-yard line by virtue of their high income. All they've got to do is run the ball into the end zone, and they've won the money game. But they try to make it too complicated, and they don't take care of the basics. And so I think that's really critical, to take a significant percentage of that earned income you have and use it to build wealth. That might be paying down your debt. That might be saving up for something like a down payment on a house. It may be maxing out your retirement account. But you've got to carve a portion of that income out and use it to build wealth. If you don't, you'll never be wealthy.
Right. Absolutely. That's an excellent point. So you're saying they are at the 2-yard line. I mean, most people don't make $200,000, and most people are happy making $50,000. I mean, they're probably at the half-yard line, right? And then with all these advisors and all these people who kind of complicate their life, they end up, messing it up. Like I know, for example, one of the ways they mess it up is they buy all these equipment and all these things they don't need, and they have this expensive office that they spend $500,000 and getting a loan to rebuild, and they kind of, before they worry about how much money actually goes into my bank account, they find ways to spend that money. And like you said, they're making $400, but they're spending it. And some people are always even spending more than what they have. And even if they're spending exactly what they have, you just need one hiccup, like one small thing to go wrong, and then the whole hell breaks loose. I mean, that's what happens to people living in hand to mouth, right? One small hiccup,
Exactly right.
and everything goes for a six.
Exactly right. So I recommend that a physician, an attending physician that's out of training, take 20% of his gross income and invest that toward retirement. Now, if he wants to save for his kids' college or some other short-term need, like another car or something like that, that's in addition to that 20%. But really, just the exercise of calculating your savings rate, how much you save in a given year, divided by your gross income, is incredibly helpful. A lot of people find out that their number's only 5%, for instance, and that's just not going to cut it. It's not enough money going in and building wealth. You've got to get that up into the 15 to 20% range, or you're just not going to get to where you want to be before retirement. And if you're looking for an early retirement, you want to retire at 50 or something like that, the percentage is going to have to be higher than 20%.
Right. So if somebody's, let's say, have kids, let's say 3 kids, and they're like, let's say, early 30s, and how much do you think they should save of their gross income?
You mean for what goal? For retirement or for those children's college?
For both, retirement and college.
Well, I mean, for retirement, it's 20%. 20% of their gross. So if they're making $200,000 a year, they need to be putting $40,000 a year toward retirement. They want those kids to go to college and actually want to help pay for it. That saving needs to be done in addition to that. Now, some people want to send their kids to a really, expensive private school and pay for the whole thing themselves. Those people are going to have to save quite a bit of income toward college as well. Other people might live in a state with relatively inexpensive and high-quality state schools and plan to have their kids, be responsible for part of the cost of that. They don't have to save nearly as much for college. And so it just depends as far as the college goes to what your goals are. But when it comes to retirement, the number's pretty fixed. You've got to get yourself into that 15 to 20% range of your gross income going toward retirement, or you're just going to find yourself in a place you don't want to be down the road.
Right. And how do you do that? I guess one is to cut expenses.
Well, the ideal way, and this is what I recommend particularly when I speak to residents, is that you grow into your income very slowly. The 4 most important words in the talks that I give to residents and attendings are live like a resident. And what I mean by that is when you come out of residency, you continue living the same lifestyle that you lived as a resident. So you make $50,000 these days as a resident. If you continue living on $50,000, and meanwhile you're making $200,000, $250,000, $300,000 a year, there's a lot of money there between, the difference between your gross income and your lifestyle that will allow you to build wealth very quickly. If you've got $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 worth of loans, and you're throwing $150,000 a year at them, they go away very quickly. Right. It's the same way with building wealth and maxing out your retirement accounts and investing. When you're throwing those kinds of dollar amounts at them, they grow very, very quickly. And so that's what I recommend people do for 2 to 5 years out of residency. Now, they can increase their lifestyle a little bit. I think, even if you give yourself a 50% raise, that would be huge in corporate America. Right. That would be, it'd be monstrous. And all of a sudden you're living on $75,000. But there's still a huge difference between $75,000 and $250,000 that you can build a lot of wealth with very quickly.
Exactly. I was just talking to a client of mine. We do marketing, and he's a dentist. He's around 40 years old. And, he literally told me that he is in a position where even if he doesn't work a day again, let's say he gets hit by a car, his family is okay because not only has he paid off all his loans, he has been buying up real estate. Every year, he takes the extra money, buys a property. now his real estate income is big enough where even if he doesn't work a day, he's okay. Of course, he wants to work, but now he's starting to choose to work, right? So he's now being picky. He's trying to think about, what am I going to do that's going to make me happy? He's not forced to work. So it changes the game.
It's a totally different mindset when you start asking yourself, what do I want to do with the rest of my life, rather than having to go to work to make your student loan payment, make your mortgage payment, and make your disability insurance payment, and to make your car payment. And all of a sudden you find that you're working 90% of the month just to make your payments and pay the tax man.
Yeah, it's almost like
a terrible feeling, and a lot of doctors are there.
Yeah, it's like servitude, right? It's like you're kind of working for the banker or whoever else.
That's right. That's exactly right. You're an indentured servant. And so it's wonderful to get to a position where you're financially independent, whether you're investing in, stocks and bonds and mutual funds or real estate, whatever it might be. But it's a wonderful place to get to where those investments are now enough to support your lifestyle without you having to do any work that you don't want to do.
Right. Now, let's say you wake up. I mean, of course, if you're a student, that advice makes a ton of sense, right? Live like a resident, right? Perfect advice. I mean, that's an amazing, piece of advice. And then after 2 or 3 years, give yourself a 50% raise. So instead of living, on 50,000, live on 75. That's an amazing advice. So don't buy that expensive house. Don't buy that, expensive car, and add up all your bank payments, right? So watch every penny. But what if you wake up one day and you're kind of, making 200 but spending 200? What do you think has to happen? Is it cold turkey?
Unfortunately, that's a much more difficult situation. It's psychologically hard for us to cut back on our spending. It's difficult. It hurts. It's painful. Much more painful than the joy you got from increasing your spending, especially if you did it all at once, like most doctors coming out of residency. But the truth of the matter is, you can either cut back now or you can dramatically cut back in retirement. There's really, the math is unrelenting. There is no way around it. If you do not save a significant chunk of your income, at certain points you will have a dramatic cut in your standard of living. And so the sooner you can do it, the better. But some tips that help people that find themselves, at mid-career and without much wealth include saving any sort of income increase or raise you may get. Then you don't feel like you're losing money. You're staying where you're at as far as your lifestyle goes, and yet you're still saving more. Another thing that a lot of people find is helpful is trying to... Can
you repeat the last point? I didn't totally catch it.
Yeah, basically I'm saying when you get a raise, save the raise.
Got it.
So if your income goes from $200,000 to $210,000, save that extra $10,000. Mm-hmm. And you don't feel like you took a pay cut at all, but you're still saving more money. Right. Another thing that some people find helpful is to increase their savings rate by 1% a year. If they calculate it out and find they're only saving 5% of their gross income for retirement, well, next year try to save 6, and then 7, and then 8. Because here's the nice thing about it. Every little bit helps. And someone who's saving 10% of their income is twice as well off as someone who's only saving 5% of their income. And so every little bit that you can do is certainly helpful. But a lot of it is simply education and realizing that this stuff actually matters and that you have a second job. You cannot be 100% clinical and expect to be financially successful. You've got to spend at least a little bit of time on your second job, which in our 401k world is being a pension fund manager. You're responsible for your pension, essentially. And whether you do that job or not, will depend on how good of a job gets done. But nobody else is going to do it for you. And even if you hire a financial advisor to assist you, they're really just a consultant, and you're still responsible for all the decisions that get made.
Right. Something you said kind of stuck with me. So let's say you find yourself, you wake up and you say, hey, I'm making 200, but I'm spending 200. And you said you have a choice. Either you cut back now or you cut back drastically in your retirement. Right? Those are the choices. There's no other way around it, right? There's no other way. That's right. The fact. So have you seen like couples, for example, a doc and his wife, having that tough conversation and making that drastic cut now? I know it sounds...
Yes, I absolutely have. For instance, I had one of my partners, she came out of residency and joined our group not long ago and showed up driving an Audi, right out of residency. And, like most docs, she's got $200,000 or $300,000 in student loans. And here she's driving an Audi bought on credit. And after, a few late night chats with some of the more frugal partners, all of a sudden she shows up with a beater and the Audi's gone. Because she realized that it was much more important to her to get her shift count down from something like 15 or 16 that she was working down to something like 12, where she could spend a little bit more time with her family and her children. That was much more important to her than driving an Audi. And doctors that become financially educated make decisions like that all the time that have dramatic effects on their finances.
You're making an excellent point. So you're saying she starts asking what's important to me, right? I mean, I heard a saying that you will find the time or the money to do the things that are important. So once you started asking that question, what's important? Spending time with my family is important. Not having that loan and having a neck over your head is important. Then you will start making those decisions, and those sacrifices will become automatic, right? It's, because she realizes 2 months ago she didn't have that Audi. So, hey, I'm not going to miss it. It's just a new habit that I'm creating. But spending time with my kid, the kid is going to be grown up, so I don't want to miss that. That's a lot more important to me than feeling like I'm rich and making people think that I'm rich.
That's exactly right. Most of us, when we really think about what we value, it's not where we're spending our money. And in reality, if you show me where your money is being spent, I can tell you what you value. And and there's often a huge disconnect there for doctors. They're just not spending their money on the stuff that's most important to them. Now, if you're, doing very well financially and you've saved lots of money and you want to spend some money on something, you want to drive an Audi or whatever, I don't have a problem with that. But you got to make sure that it's what you value, that you're spending your money on the stuff that's most important to you.
Right. And my experience.
And for some people, that's going to be an Audi. For some people, it's going to be vacations. For some people, it's going to be, a big fancy house. For other people, it's going to be a very early retirement. It just depends on what you value. But make sure that your money is going toward what your values are.
Right. And what you're saying is many doctors don't think like that. They just do it because the buddy has an Audi, so I have an Audi. The buddy has a big house, I need a big house. So instead of their value, because they didn't really take the time to think about what's important to them, a lot of those decisions are happening because I don't know. What's your take on it?
I think that's exactly right. The other thing that gets people in trouble is they don't realize just how progressive our tax code is. And they assume that getting a 5 times raise, going from $50,000 a year to $250,000 a year, means they can spend 5 times the money. And that's just not the case because your tax bill goes up so dramatically with that increase in income. It might really only be a 3 times increase in after-tax money. And so they end up, not realizing just how much taxes are, and before they know it, they're spending a huge percentage of their money on their lifestyle.
Right. And the other habit I have seen people make is that they don't look at the cost; they look at the monthly payment. So
that's classic mistake for all Americans. That one's really not physician specific. If you're buying your house and your car and that sort of stuff on monthly payments, you're doing it all wrong. You need to be looking at the bottom line and realizing that at some point you've got to pay for this thing. And so it's really about what's the most efficient and best way to pay for it rather than, what's the maximum payment that I can get away with. Because when there's a hiccup in your life, as you mentioned earlier, when something happens, all of a sudden you're already maxed out on all these payments that you need to make, and there's no room for mistakes. Right.
It's like a person walking, where he could have a heart attack any minute. Better not to get to that territory, right? Better not get close to that.
That's exactly right. And especially physician incomes, some people are employees on a very fixed salary, but for the most part, docs have a fairly variable income. And, if you start growing into that income when times are good, then when the times aren't quite so good, all of a sudden you still got to make all the same payments, and the thing that gets cut out is your savings for the future. And you do that for too long, and all of a sudden the future doesn't look so bright anymore.
Right. So we talked about cutting expenses and various ways of doing that. What about taking on a part-time job? I mean, real part-time job. Is that something that people can use to perhaps pay down debt or, do things to just kind of get out, from being underwater to above water? At least it's not a negative net worth, at least to zero. Have you seen people do that?
Absolutely. There's two ways to really increase the amount of money that you can use to build wealth. The first is to spend less of the income you have. Basically that's defense. And the other is to increase the amount of money you make, and that's offense. And you can do that by making your practice more efficient, or by changing your payer mix, or by working longer hours, or working more days a month, or, taking more call, or working more night shifts. There's lots of ways a physician can do it without even changing jobs or adding a new job on. But obviously, if you also have some sort of a side hustle, whatever that might be, whether it's book writing or speaking or consulting or, running a website like I do, obviously that can make a huge difference as well, particularly if it turns out you're very good at it. And if nothing else, a lot of times it makes you appreciate what your main job is. You realize, I really do love medicine. I really do like doing that. And I realize that I'm being paid pretty well for the work I'm doing compared to how hard it is to hustle and make money doing something else. So for sure, it's good to do both offense and defense. And sometimes it's easier to just earn more money. And at other times it's easier to cut spending. So whichever one seems to be the best way to go, that's what I'd recommend be done.
Right. The only thing you would advise is, in other words, don't make more and spend more. If you're going to make more, make sure that extra money is going somewhere, where it's going to go towards savings or paying down debt. Or if you're going to spend less, then make sure that you don't.
That's exactly right.
Right.
The truth is, most of us aren't going to be any happier by driving a slightly nicer car or having a slightly bigger home or spending a little bit more on vacation. It's really not going to make us much happier. When you really look at the happiness literature, those aren't the things that make us happy. And so if we concentrate on that and focus on what's actually adding joy to my life, then we typically make the right financial decisions.
Right. So step one, from what I'm hearing, is get out of debt. Have a positive net worth. Is that correct?
Well, positive net worth is everything you own minus everything you owe. So you can have a positive net worth while still having some debt. Most of the time people don't have their mortgage paid off by the time they get to a positive net worth, for instance. But for most of us, we have these student loans hanging over our heads for far too long. The way I look at it is, if you had gone into the military, your loans, even though they're time loans rather than money loans, would be paid off in 4 years. So if you can't pay off your student loans in less than 4 years, you would have been better off in the military. So I think really trying to get rid of those student loans within 2 to 5 years of coming out of residency is an awfully good idea. But so a lot of these other debts that we take on are just stupid. We should never have them in the first place. Credit card debts, cards aren't for borrowing money. They're for convenience, ordering something from Amazon or booking an airline flight. They're not actually designed for borrowing money. If you're carrying a balance on your credit cards, you need to cut the things up. You've shown that you can't be trusted with them, basically. Same thing with a car loan, right? Look at what a physician makes in a given month. He might make $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 in a month. You can buy a decent used car for $10,000.
Right.
You shouldn't have to save up more than a couple of months for a pretty decent car. So there's really no reason for docs to be buying cars on credit. I don't care if they're getting it at 2%. It's just a bad habit to have picked up early in your career. So when I need a car, if I have $2,000, I buy a $2,000 car. If I have $10,000, I buy a $10,000 car. If I have $50,000, I might buy a $50,000 car. But I don't borrow to buy a car, because that just slows down your wealth building process. It causes you to have bad habits. There's this idea out there that if I borrow at 2% and I invest at 10%, I'm going to come out ahead. And there's no doubt that the math works. The math works on that. But the problem is that we're people, and we don't actually do that. We don't actually invest the money. We just borrow to buy whatever we want at 2%, and then we spend the money on something else. So I think we really got to be honest with how we're using debt. And as a general rule, paying off debt is going to make us wealthier, simply because, of the behavioral implications of doing so.
Right. You're saying, I'm just trying to think out loud. So let's say you want that expensive kitchen, for 100,000, pay cash for it. If you don't have cash, don't do it. You want an expensive car?
That's exactly right. It's surprisingly easy to tell whether you can afford something or not. You look at the price of what you want to buy, and then you look at your bank account.
Right.
And that's really it. Instead of trying to figure out some complicated way to pay for it, just wait until you've saved up the money and then buy it. It reminds me of this old Saturday Night Live skit with Steve Martin. The whole skit is based on this one-page book called Don't Buy Stuff You Cannot Afford. And that's literally the message of the entire skit, is that you don't buy something until you have the money. But it's like a revelation to a lot of Americans out there, especially doctors.
Right. And because they think they have this huge income, they don't realize, really they don't have positive cash flow. It's all going to pay some banker or somebody else.
That's exactly right. I mean, we get this message from society that we're rich. And the truth is, we're not rich in the early part of our career. And if we don't manage that income well, we may never be rich.
It's like the NFL player. Many NFL players end up broke. Technically they're supposed to be filthy rich because they make millions, right? But by the time they retire, they have nothing.
Right. It's actually very common. They've implemented some financial planning programs for new NFL players, because the average NFL player is only in the league for 3 years and only making $600,000 a year. And while that sounds like a lot of money, by the time you've paid the taxes on it, the total might only be $1 million, and it's tough to live on $1 million for the entire rest of your life. Right.
But they spend like they're making $600 every year, and they buy these cars and the houses, and and a lot of times by the time they retire, not only are they not rich, they probably have a negative net worth. Probably all these debts they have.
That's exactly right. Doctors actually have a lot in common with athletes and performers, in that their income is based on some special talent or skill they have, rather than their business acumen. By the time a small business owner gets an income similar to a physician's, he's actually pretty savvy when it comes to money and finances and business. And so he knows how to manage that money because he's had a lot of practice on the way there. But a physician coming out of residency just has that income dumped into his lap, just like an NFL player coming out of college, and really hasn't yet acquired the skills necessary to manage that money well. And if he doesn't learn them fast, he's going to burn through a lot of years of that high income without having anything to show for it.
Absolutely. So we talked about, these good habits about, getting out of debt, having a positive net worth, paying things for cash. In other words, don't buy, an expensive car or expensive kitchen unless you have the cash to pay for it. Now, let's say you are above ground, right? So let's say you have a positive, net worth. You are making a lot more than you're spending, and you have those, that extra money. Now, the next question is, what do you do with that extra money? Let's say you paid off your student loan and, things like that, and you're not adding unnecessary expenses like, that expensive laser equipment or that expensive addition to your office.
Well, that's when things start getting really fun, because every month you realize you're wealthier than you were the month before. And you're simply looking at, where to invest the money. You're looking at what kind of tax-protected and asset-protected accounts you can use to invest that money. You're looking at whether you should be investing or paying down debt. There's lots of nuance to it. But, man, if you can get the basics right and you're spending much less than you're earning, the rest of it eventually takes care of itself. But my entire website and book goes through all that stuff, as far as how you should be investing your money and whether you should be paying off a debt versus investing in a 401k or whatever it might be. All that stuff is really just icing on the cake. If you can get the basics right, the rest of it's really pretty easy.
Now you have to have fun. Now you're playing offense like 100% of the time.
That's exactly right. All of a sudden your debts are disappearing rapidly and your investing accounts are growing rapidly. It's just a really good place to be. And you realize, well, hey, you know what? I can have that stuff I dreamed of. I can have that good life, people shouldn't assume that I'm some kind of a monk, right? That I don't have any sort of an enjoyable life because I saved a bunch of money early on in my career. I've got a big fancy wake boat sitting in the driveway. My wife and I both drive expensive SUVs. We vacation in Europe and Belize and places like that. We're taking all the kids to Japan this summer. We're living the good life.
Right.
But that delay, as we grew into our income slowly, has made all the difference in the world. And now here I am at 41, essentially financially independent, and can live whatever life I want to for the next 20 or 30 years of my career. If I don't want to go see patients, I don't have to go see patients. And that makes seeing patients so much more enjoyable when you don't have to do it.
Right. Because now you're choosing to do it. So you're going to be picky on what kind of patients and where you're going to work and what you're going to do. And I mean, so you're playing, it's like you have
I'm
choices
an emergency doc, so I can't be too picky about what kind of patients I'm going to see. I mean, I pretty much see what comes in the door, but I can certainly be picky about how many shifts I work per month and whether I work night shifts or not and what kind of a facility I work in and those kinds of questions, you know. And every doctor's got some things about his practice that he likes or doesn't like and would love to change. And if he had the financial resources to do that, you know, he would increase his overall life happiness by doing it.
Right. And I think also as humans, we hate it when we have to do it. We love it when we choose to do it. Right?
That's right.
And like you said, even though you are, helping, having this website and doing stuff on it, I mean, now you appreciate being a doctor more because, hey, you realize how hard it is to make money the other way. Now you get to do something you love because you have the choice and you went to school and you're really passionate about it, but it also pays, really damn well compared to every other, business out there.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure it compares well to every business out there. I mean, there's certainly other ways to make money.
Right.
But, it's like my friend that runs a private equity fund. And he tells me at the end of the day, I'm making rich guys richer.
Right.
Whereas you can look at people and say, I helped somebody on one of the worst days of their life, or I saved that person's life. And it's a little bit more gratifying to do something like that for the rest of your life when you have a choice of what you're going to do. And so I'm all for practicing medicine. I enjoy it, and I plan to do it for quite a long time. But I'm doing it on my terms, not because I have to do it to make a car payment.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. That's amazing. And I would love to get into, playing offense more. Maybe we could do a second podcast, where we can talk about, the different ways to play offense and different ways to think about things, now that a person is debt free.
Sure. That'd be a lot of fun. And, part of it is one of the biggest advantages that doctors have out there. Doctors are always looking for a tax break, right? Because they pay so much in taxes. But they don't realize that probably the best tax break they have out there is their retirement accounts. A retirement account is not only does it give you this huge tax break when you put the money in, but you still got the money. It's the best kind of tax break there is. And then for most physicians, after that money grows in a tax-protected way for years and years and years, when they take it out, because of the structure of our tax code, when they take it out, they're likely to pay much less in tax as a percentage than they saved when they put the money in the account. And so if you're in your peak earnings years, those tax-deferred accounts are a huge, huge blessing and ought to be used not only to protect your assets from taxes, but to protect them from creditors as well, because in most states, retirement accounts get a whole lot of asset protection. And so the general strategy is to use these tax-protected accounts that the government gives you, a 401k and a profit-sharing plan and a backdoor Roth IRA and a health savings account and a 529 account for college, and then invest in low-cost, broadly diversified investments like index funds from a company like Vanguard inside those accounts. And when you cut out all those fees and all those taxes and you take a reasonable amount of risk with your investments, you find they grow much more rapidly than you thought they ever could. And before long, you realize that you too are a millionaire or a multimillionaire and can do whatever you want with the rest of your life, which is a great feeling.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And the website, you have podcasts, you have blogs, you have a book. Can you talk a little bit about the website you created to help other doctors like yourself?
Sure. The website can be found at whitecoatinvestor.com. And it started out as a blog, basically an updated website, updated 3 times a week. And I still have new blog posts going up 3 times a week. But the real value there is in the 1,000 older posts that have already been written. I mean, if you are a physician or other high-income professional and you have a financial question, I can almost guarantee I've answered that question in one of those blog posts. And so a quick search on the site will more often than not find you the exact answer to the question you're looking for. In addition to the blog, the site also has a forum where you can ask questions to a lot of knowledgeable docs who have been there and done that. These are docs that have a really great handle on finances, and they can answer your questions in a way that I simply can't get to everybody that's asking me questions. And so I also have a monthly newsletter. All it costs is your email address, and it shows up in your email box once a month with links to the best physician-specific financial stuff on the internet that's out there. Of course, if you prefer to learn from, something like a podcast, which you probably do if you're listening to this one, I also have a podcast. Just search White Coat Investor on, whatever your favorite podcast provider is, whether it's iTunes or whoever else, and you can get this information during your commute. And there's also, we're just getting started with a YouTube channel, and we'll probably have a conference getting started next winter. And so there's lots of different ways to learn this material. But the point is, however you learn best or however you prefer to learn, and if it's a book, you can buy the book on Amazon. There's a Kindle version. There's even an audiobook version. But however you like to learn, I'm trying to get this information to you as best I can.
That's amazing. How many doctors do you think visit your website, or is that hard to know for sure?
It's actually not that hard to know. It's a little hard to know whether they're doctors or not, but I know exactly how many people are coming. We get about 700,000 page views or hits on the website per month. And so, there's about 1 million doctors in the country, between physicians and dentists. And, obviously some of those are people coming back to the website, the same people that came earlier in the month. But it looks like something like 130,000 unique individuals come to the website in any given month. So we're certainly making some progress, but there's obviously lots of docs out there we haven't reached yet, and we're trying to get to them as fast as we can.
Right. That's amazing. This is amazing. So you got so much out of it, right? You became wiser when it comes to your money.
Obviously it helped me a lot to research this stuff and, and to be able to share it with others. There's obviously some topics that don't apply to me that my readers are very interested in. For example, dealing with their student loans, the federal income-driven repayment programs. I never really dealt with, but my readers are very interested in them. And so I've done a lot of research on that and tried to guide them through those processes as well.
Right. This is amazing, Doctor. I enjoyed myself today. It's a wonderful, 45 minutes talking to you today. And anybody who's interested, please visit whitecoatinvestor.com. And is there a way for them to get a hold of you? Is it through the forums, or how do you engage?
You can always email me. My email address is editor@whitecoatinvestor.com. But I try to respond to as much as I can on the forum or comments left on the blog. I'm relatively easy to contact. It often takes me a few days to get back to you. People with individual questions, I try to answer them as much as I can and guide them toward what they're looking for, whether it's, a blog post or whether it's some sort of a, student loan refinancing company or mortgage company or financial advisor or an insurance agent. Whatever they're looking for at the time, I try to be as helpful as I can.
And can you spell your email out? I didn't catch that.
Sure. editor@whitecoatinvestor.com.
Perfect. Thank you, Doctor. This is an amazing time, and I loved it, and I'm sure the listeners would love it too.
Thank you for listening to a wonderful episode of the Growing Vet podcast show.